The Rugby Business Network is a global organisation that connects senior business people who put their resources back into the rugby community in a sustainable way. Our members share values, the values of rugby, and we connect them online or at our events. We can also make personal face-to-face introductions to business leaders who want to do larger deals together. Visit therugbybusinessnetwork.com and apply to become a member today.
This is the Rugby Business Network podcast, which is brought to you by CMME Mortgages. Now, for our listeners who are based in the UK, CMME Mortgages are a market leader when it comes to providing mortgage advice, specifically focusing on clients with complex incomes like business owners, contractors or affluent professionals. Now, CMME Mortgages, they have been around since 2004, so they definitely know what they are doing, and they're able to help clients get their best possible mortgage by taking into consideration their full financial situation. For more information, go and visit cmmemortgages.com/rugby and see how they could possibly help you out. Well, thank you for joining us for this week's episode, which is a special one as we are about to speak with a former professional Irish rugby player who played in the Celtic League, English Premiership and French Top 14 during his career. But since retirement, he's been pushing his body and mind to the limit by taking on extreme challenges, the most recent of which saw him cross the Atlantic Ocean all by himself. We are honoured to be joined by Damian Browne. Damian, thank you for giving up some of your time to share your stories, your experiences with us on the Rugby Business Network podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Fantastic. Well, Damian, I know our listeners, they're keen to hear you speak about your incredible adventure across the Atlantic, and we'll get to that. Let's first, though, discuss your professional rugby career, which spanned a wonderful 16 years. I mean, you played for a few different clubs, namely Leinster, Connacht and Northampton Saints, just to name a few. What was the highlight, though, for you during your career, if it is even possible to select one moment?
Very difficult to select one moment in 16 years. When I look back on my career, I look back on the journey very fondly, and all the learnings and values that the sport gave me and the people I was surrounded with during those times, you know. As you can imagine, it wasn't all one romantic love affair. There was ups and downs and failures and successes along the way, and it was far from a linear path, but that's what makes it great, is that you learn to appreciate and deal with certain setbacks and failures along the way, and when you do have any sort of success, be it personal or team-wise, the appreciation and the knowing that how you got there is all the more sweeter.
Definitely. Damian, most rugby players, professional rugby players, they will say after the career, it's the highs they prefer to look at and not necessarily the low moments. Were there more highs for you than lows? Yeah,
there was. Had some great times at certain clubs. Obviously, playing and in Connacht, being from Connacht and starting my professional rugby career here and having my first cap with them, and then playing here for another 4 years and getting to a European Challenge Cup semi-final here at the time was a huge thing for the club. I remember it very well, playing in front of about 8,000 people in the sports ground. Now that's regular enough for Connacht these days, but back in 2004 it wasn't, you know, so it was huge for a 23-year-old from Galway, having kind of, you know, skipped days in school to go watch Connacht play Fiji and Australia and New Zealand over the years when touring teams used to come by here, you know, a guy who'd like been there on the terraces watching, and then to be on the pitch, been watched by 8,000 people from around the province, was a very special occasion. Unfortunately, we lost the game it was a double leg game, you know, on the aggregate score, even though we won that game. So that was a great time in my career. And then I look back on certain occasions with Northampton. You know, I got to captain the club a couple of times as a 25-year-old, which was a huge personal milestone, because I'm kind of a quiet enough guy in general around rugby clubs. You know, I'm reserved and introverted, so to be given that honour brought a lot out of me. You know, it was a big part of my development and learning. And, you know, moving on to France, and, you know, like, it mightn't be rugby orientated, but just learning the language there, and kind of dealing with a new culture and adapting to that, and seeing again how I grew as a person in that time. And then, I was very, very fortunate then when I moved to Leinster to be involved in an exceptional squad of players and an exceptional coaching ticket. So that was a really, really special time. You know, I still, you know, I would have happily retired at that club. That was the only club I didn't make the decision to leave. Personally, it was the club's decision because of injury, but you know, I learned so much in that time, and it was amazing to see these world-class players, like, who were incredibly humble and driven, and to see and to play with those guys who on the outside you might think completely different of, and just to see the work they put in every day, and how selfless they were in the pursuit of honours, you know, for the team, was an amazing time in my career, and we did do very well as a team. You know, we won the Heineken Cup and the European Challenge Cup and the league in my 2 years there. So it was an amazing experience.
Yeah, and you also got capped for Ireland at under 21 level, but unfortunately, Damian, you never quite made it into the senior national team. Is there a specific reason why you believe you never got the opportunity, and do you have any regrets because of that?
I'm a big believer in what you achieve is what you deserve, you know. So as far as I got, that's exactly what I achieved. And, you know, as far as Browne O'Driscoll got with 140 odd caps, that's exactly what he deserved as well, you know. So I got as far as I deserved. I put whatever work I put in, that's exactly what I deserved, is what I believe. So you know, I probably didn't help myself in some of the choices I made, like moving to England at 24, and then moving on to France. But, you know, all that being said, I did come back to Ireland as a 31-year-old, and I did have aspirations throughout my whole career. Like, you know, I think every young fella who plays rugby at a young age will say he wants to play for Ireland, and I was no different. So I did have those aspirations to play, but you know, I didn't play well my first year back in Ireland. I was nowhere near good enough for, you know, I played quite a lot with Leinster, but I wasn't on form. I only had a few decent games that year. And the second year things were going good, and I was really happy with where I was in my physical preparation and mental preparation. I felt I was in a really good place, and I felt I was playing the best rugby I'd played since kind of my second year in Northampton. And then, unfortunately, I just made a tackle against Claremont in the Aviva, and my shoulder went, and had a complete reconstruction on a shoulder that was giving me trouble for about a year and a half anyway. So I never got back playing after that, and then I moved on to Oyonnax and finished in Oyonnax 2 years later. So, you know, there's all sorts of, you know, if we got forensic about it, we could go into all sorts of reasons and that, but yeah, it wasn't to be, unfortunately. Regrets, I suppose there is some regrets. You know, I would have loved to play for Ireland, obviously, but you know, that's they're part of life, and I don't dwell on them. But yeah, what can I do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Damian, you touched on it there. Your injury sadly forced you into retirement, which is never the way a professional sportsman or woman wants to bow out. Despite the injury, though, were you ready to step away from the game? And did you find it difficult at all to adjust to life without playing rugby?
I was very ready, very ready mentally, and you know, I felt that I had given absolutely everything I could to rugby over 16 years. You know, I felt I'd exhausted it from every angle. I'm a guy who's all in with something I'm committed to, and I felt I was all in and constantly trying to improve. And you know, at the end, I was just done. You know, and I was ready to move on. Now, saying that, just knowing my personality, if I could have played another year, which was probably the maximum amount I could have, I probably would have. You know, I would have gone on another year, just because it's such a special thing to be able to do. You know, play play a sport for a living that you dreamed of as a child, you know. But all that been said and done, it wasn't to be. You know, my injury never cleared up, and it was the doors for me. But I was ready to go. I had plans. I had other things I wanted to do in my life, and other places of the world I wanted to see and do, and passions to explore. You know, things that I was really interested in, and things that I had been thinking about for a long time. So it was very non-traditional. Like I didn't have a job or anything like that to step into. But you know, it was more along the lines of you know, travel and adventure, and seeing the world and exploring a little bit, and using the freedom that I was going to have not being in a rugby environment, because you know, professional rugby is 11 months a year, intense 11 months a year. So you know, anytime I had that month off, I was kind of at an airport, getting on a plane, going somewhere I wanted to go, or doing something I wanted to do. So now I was going to have 12 months of it, and the plan was, when I knew I was retiring, I wrote down some stuff that I wanted to do before I was 40 years old, and I was 35 then. So it was kind of like a 5-year plan of all different stuff, from you know, lifestyle changes to travel to adventure to business to income to service to family, you know, goals in all those areas that I want to achieve. And a lot of it was, what would you say, a lot of it wasn't like, there wasn't exact goals, but I knew I had areas I wanted to go into and just explore what happened from there.
Well, speaking about the challenges, Damian, soon after you were forced to hang up your rugby boots, you decided to take on the toughest foot race on earth. It's known as, obviously, the Marathon des Sables, which is roughly 6 marathons in 6 days across the Sahara Desert, all while carrying everything you need to survive the experience. How would you describe that experience?
Sandy. Hot. I could describe it in many ways. Nerve-wracking going into it, because I finished with a knee injury, and that knee injury, I just took 6 months off and just tried to. I did some travel originally, and tried to let it recover from the pounding was the real problem I had. So when I went back into my 6-month preparation for the Marathon des Sables, I was very nervous and anxious to see how it would hold up, and I eased into it very slowly and did a hell of a lot of work on my mobility and strengthening around the joint, and thankfully it held up, you know. So I was very prepared coming into the race, and the race itself is it's an incredible experience. You know, you have to carry all your own food and anything that you need to survive for the 6 days on your back from the start, you know. And we went into it on day one. My year, the race, the course changes every year. So my year was the longest race they've ever done, 257 kilometres, and on day one we had 15 kilometres of dunes straight out of the gate on checkpoint 1. So you know, you could just see a lot of people were in very bad places because they really tested us early, and then we had sandstorms, and like after day 3, a former winner of the race had retired, and they had the most retirees the race has ever had. So just kind of puts in perspective the challenge and the extreme conditions we had. But like when I look back on the race, my fondest memory is that you're put into a tent with you put into these Berber tents, which are local tribesmen's tents, you know, which are basically just a large burlap sack with a stick in the middle of them and a carpet on the ground, and you're put in with like 8 of your fellow countrymen. And Irish humour being what it is, we're very self-deprecating, so we just kind of laughed at our own misery and our own suffering, but we had that, you know, incredible accelerated bonding that comes from going through something like that together, you know. And I'm still very, very close with a lot of the guys I shared that tent with and that experience, you know, because it just brings you, you know, it brings you into like I said, an accelerated kind of relationship. So that's one of my fondest memories, apart from all the, you know, the blisters and sunstroke and heat and all that.
Yeah, wow, amazing. And taking on the harsh conditions, Damian, was this the perfect thing that you needed in a way in order to be able to close the rugby chapter of your life and start a new one?
The reason took on the Marathon des Sables was because I saw a documentary on it while I was still playing with Connacht. So I was only around 22 or 23, and it was three brothers from Galway who did it. They're called the O'Donovan brothers. Richard is a well-known ultra distance runner. He's run across America and he did it with two of his brothers, a local guy here. So it was always something I wanted to do. Like, everything about it appealed to me, you know, the challenge and the extremes and the adventure of it, and just seeing the part of the world that, you know, hardly anyone ever gets to see. You know, the race takes place in Morocco, but it's really deeply in Morocco, very close to the Algerian border. So it's a very undiscovered and unexplored place, and then to get to do it in that kind of challenge setting is a pretty cool thing. So yeah, it was something I always knew. I literally wrote it down there and then that I would do it someday. I would attempt it. So it was once I came out of rugby, or once I knew I was going to retire, it was the one thing, or it was the obvious thing that I was going to try first. Also, one of the elements that came into that decision was that, like, it's going to be easier to do a 257-kilometre ultra when I'm 35 than it is when I'm 55, you know, because who knows what the 16 years of rugby is going to have done to my body and what sort of state certain joints are going to be in at that stage. So I just said, get it done early, and at least you'll have, you know, won't be questioning things later on.
Well, crossing the Sahara Desert is possibly a walk in the park when you compare it to the Atlantic Challenge, which you successfully completed in February this year. Just to give our listeners a bit more info, it took you just over 63 days to row from the Canary Islands to Antigua, all alone and unsupported. The question, Damian, is why? Why this challenge?
Very similar to the MDS. It's the appeal of the physical and mental challenge. You know, I'm very passionate about the human body and its capabilities when it's prepared mentally and physically in the right way, and I'm always exploring that myself and pushing my limits and you know, reaping the rewards that you get from challenging yourself and overcoming, or sometimes not overcoming, you know, sometimes failing and learning. So for me, this one stuck out like a sore thumb when I first read about it. I read James Cracknell and Ben Fogle's book, and I was like, wow, like what an endeavour, what a thing to take on. Let's do it. You know, I just, like, that's for me. I just love that sort of, I love taking on things that seem almost insurmountable. And I thought, is there anything as hard as trying to cross an ocean on your own? So that was it then. I was committed and I knew someday I would do it. And, you know, once the MDS finished, I was anxious to kind of commit to another adventure, and you know, on that list I told you that at the 5-year kind of list, you know, the Atlantic was on that, but it was a scary prospect, you know, but a scary prospect committing to it, because the campaign is so big around it. You know, it's not just like you can pay an entry fee like the MDS and you just train. Then it's a very expensive endeavour, so you have to bring in lots of sponsors. And then I wanted to kind of emulate that campaign, the enormity of the Atlantic Challenge in a charity element. You know, so I wanted to raise funds, but do it, you know, push myself in that side of the campaign as well. So, you know, the total size of the campaign was quite overwhelming at the start, and often I felt out of my depth. But I think when something is really important to you on many different levels, you push through that feeling of being overwhelmed and that feeling of that's stressful at times, and you find a way to get it done.
Well, you went into the Atlantic Challenge with no prior experience when it comes to rowing, so you had to pretty much train yourself into gaining that knowledge. With that said, Damian, what would you say was the most difficult aspect of this adventure for you to get through?
The race itself obviously posed many problems to me. The biggest challenge was possibly the maritime side of it, you know. The rowing side, even though I wasn't a rower, the only work I'd ever done was on an ergometer, which is the indoor rower. People might know it from their gyms. But The biggest challenge, definitely, the rowing you pick up in a few hours on a boat, but the biggest challenge is learning about the sea and, the whole maritime side of it. Even the language they use in that area is foreign to me. I had like no clue, and all this jargon is getting thrown at you. So you're not only trying to learn something completely new, but you're also trying to decipher the words that have been thrown at you, and you're like, what the hell is a jackstay, or what the hell? I didn't even know what a hull was 2 years or a year before the race. I remember going out to the start in 2016. A friend of mine, Gavin Hennigan, was taking on the race, and he was talking to another girl, Elaine Hopley, a Scottish girl, and they were talking about Elaine just buying the hull of her boat, and I'm standing between the boats going, I have no idea what even a hull is, and that's how out of my depth I was. But I was determined to learn. I was determined to learn as much as I can in that year, and determined to get to the start line, because that's the biggest challenge, getting across the ocean, everything is back in your control, but getting a boat to the start line, it's not so much. You need people to come on board with you. You need sponsors. You need help in many, many different areas, even all the learnings on the maritime side of it, like learning the navigation and communication and sea survival and first aid at sea and all sorts of things. So that was, there was moments in that year, many moments where, it was difficult, but you just, like I said before, if it's important enough to you, you just find a way, you find a way to make it work, and that's what I did, and I eventually got to the start line, and then when you pull away, you have this just wave of emotion and crazy, obviously there's a lot of adrenaline pumping through you, just because you've started something that you've put every fibre in your being into, and there was moments where you thought you mightn't get there, but eventually you have, and it's just an incredible feeling just to start,
Absolutely incredible. Now, rugby, it's obviously a team sport, as we know, yet the Atlantic Challenge you did all alone. With that in mind, were you able to draw on any of your experience as a professional rugby player to help you during this journey across the ocean, or were you completely out of your comfort zone?
Oh, absolutely. Like in everything I do, even in daily life, I revolve. I lean on a lot of the values I would have learned in rugby, and with the Atlantic in mind, none more so than ones like discipline and resilience. You have to be incredibly disciplined out there, and even in the way where you put your foot when you're moving around the boat, how you get your rest, how you stick to your work times, and all that comes from rugby. I've just been institutionalized, or just been drilled into me as a habit over the years, and something as, if you were like me, if you were somebody who was always looking to get better and always just trying to add on a 1% here, 1% there, you would be kind of very much molded into a way a rugby player, or the way they want you to be in that environment. So habits are really important, and discipline is habits, so discipline on the boat is unbelievably important. Even if I take, for example, when I'm going to sleep at night on the boat, because I was a solo rower with a foot steering system, meant that the boat did what the conditions dictated that night. So I'd have to tie everything down, double, triple knots, just make sure everything was in place. Like, so if the boat does go over at night while I'm asleep, that I don't lose anything that's incredibly valuable to me, or that could put the success of the mission in jeopardy. So, when I think of, I lost an oar on day 9 when I woke up, and you wake up and you're untying everything and getting ready to row for the morning, and I reached out to my right-hand side and there was no oar there. And somehow the oar had slid down, even though I put double knots and it had been lanyarded, which had just been tied to the boat. It had slid out of its collar, and it's out there on the Atlantic now, still somewhere floating around. But things like that. Like, so you can imagine what I was like after losing the oar on day 9. I was just so vigilant. I mean, tying down the boat at night used to take half an hour, and that's hard to do, man, when you're 45 days in and you're getting smashed by waves and it's pitch dark and you have to lean over the side of the boat and put a triple knot in one of the oar lanyards, like it's easier not to do that than to do that. So, having that discipline and that kind of diligence instilled in me from years of playing rugby was hyper important out there, and just been very, very resilient as well. And if there's one thing rugby inbuilds in you, it's resilience. So there was many times where the easy thing out there to do would have just been to rest up and feel sorry for myself, and having that drive and resilience to process whatever was making me feel sorry for myself as quickly as I could, and then get back to the task at hand, which was to cross the Atlantic. And how was I going to do that? Well, I was going to do it by rowing. So getting back on the oars and getting back in control of the things I could control instead of the uncontrollables, like which are very, very, very easy, and they're to fall into, and they're a daily battle out there. It's not an hourly battle, because just because of the endeavour and the challenge of it and the extremes you go through and the amount of time you're on your own, so your mind just slips into that uncontrollable negative state. So just having the awareness and resilience to bring it back into the controllables and the positive state was just absolutely paramount for me out there.
Very interesting, the skills and traits as a rugby player that you called on during that challenge. But I'm interested to know, Damian, which has given you the most exhilaration, being a professional rugby player or taking on extreme challenges as an adventurer?
I think there's moments being a professional rugby player that are, you just can't recreate them. Like there's moments for me, there's moments of tackles I made and carries I made, that physical kind of mano-a-mano thing, that were just like the feelings are indescribable of them, and that's why I love the game, and that's the part of the game I miss most. And I can give and take everything else with the game, but like that one-on-one, the physical battle is just something that I just, I've accepted that the hole will never be filled, because it's only rugby that can really give you that. So those moments are the ones that, when I think of the word exhilaration, they're the ones that pop into my head first. And there's particular moments in particular games or particular tackles in particular games in particular that just, like I said, pop into my head, because, well, obviously those feelings I got from making those tackles or carries were so strong at the time. They were, unforgettable even now, whatever it is, 10 or 5 or 10 years later. So with the world of let's call it extreme adventure sports, they're more long burners, that there's nothing like the peak of making a tackle, like the peak of sensation of making a tackle or a carry, a big carry. In these, they in themselves are very special. I don't want to undervalue them or devalue them, because I don't. I value them very, very highly, but I don't think there's anything that can compare to the sensation, like I said, of a tackle or a carry.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been nearly 3 years now, Damian, since your retirement from professional rugby. Do you have any other interests away from the adventures and the challenges, perhaps in business? So what keeps you busy these days?
So actually, I'm working on a couple of projects at the moment. One of them is slightly linked with what my past and my experiences. I'm trying to set up a human performance center where people can come and basically, maximize their potential, your human potential through, physical and mental preparation. So it's got a lot to do with obviously what I did in my rugby career and what I've continued to do in my, let's call it my adventure career, because I prepare now maybe even better than I did as a rugby player, because that's just me. I'm constantly looking for improvements in my life. So So I feel like in a way, I feel like I've discovered something, and I want to share it with people, and I want to give back, and I want to empower people and give them control back to their lives. So I'm trying to package a project at the moment that I can do that, because I think if I can, I should. So and I think it'll be very valuable and beneficial to people's lives, so that's number one. And the second project, you won't be surprised to hear, is a new challenge. I'm working on my challenge. I've committed to the 7 summits, which are the highest mountain on each continent.
Oh, wow.
And I'm taking on Elbrus in August, which is Europe's highest mountain. It's in Russia. So that's the first one, and I'm hoping to finish with Mount Everest in 2020. Wow. So I'm really, really excited. Training for that at the moment, and trying to set up the Human Performance Center as well. So I'm kept pretty busy at the moment, and my energy is directed in those two endeavours. So yeah, it's exciting times.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that you've already decided what your next challenge is going to be. But the question though is, Damian, as we end off the podcast now, how can our Rugby Business Network members who have been listening, how can they provide their support and possibly even sponsorship in any way for this next challenge?
Well, that would be incredible if they could in any way, because I'm like I said, starting into this project now, and I will be kind of looking for some form of sponsorship or some form of support down the line, because as with these major expeditions, they don't come cheap. So they could go to DamianBrowne.com and make contact there if they have any interest. I'm sure we could see what we could do together. I'm happy if I can, provide some value for people's business, or if they feel that their values of their business, correlate with my values as a person and what I want to achieve in my life. Great. I think it would be nice. It'd be an incredible fit. And like I said, go to DamianBrowne.com and make contact.
Brilliant. Well, Damian, many retired professional rugby players would describe the experience of playing the sport as an adventure, whereas your approach is that life is an adventure which you are living to the fullest. Thank you for sharing your amazing experiences with us on the Rugby Business Network podcast, and we wish you all the best for that next adventure and your projects.
Thanks very much. Pleasure to be here.
As well as connecting business people to each other, the Rugby Business Network helps rugby-related charities to meet business people. We also run our own Life After Rugby program, which helps pro and ex-pro players for free to transition from pro rugby to business via work placements or jobs, or starting their own businesses. Visit therugbybusinessnetwork.com today and help rugby to help people.